All right, so we're in Genesis chapter 24. And in the last chapter, Abraham had just buried his wife Sarah in a cave next to the field that he bought from the children of Heth, which he spent quite a lot of time going over the receipts about. So here in chapter 24, we finally say goodbye to Abraham. It says, Abraham was old and very advanced in age. The Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. Abraham said to his servant, the elder of his house, who ruled over all that he had, please put your hand under my thigh. I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of the earth, that you shall not take a wife for my son of the daughters of the Canaanites amongst whom I live. So this is already pretty weird. That Abraham is asking his servant to put his hand under Abraham's thigh in order to take an oath. And there are, of course, a number of theories as to why this is. It could be that the peculiar type of oath that it is, that the servant is looking for a wife for Abraham's son.
Well, he's really old. Maybe he can't stand up.
Maybe he can't stand up. Maybe
But
maybe
why?
he can't see that far away. He wants to make sure the servant's actually there. You know, there is the Jewish tradition that this is to be taken literally. That it says under the thigh, and so it is under the thigh. There are a number of theologians that say, no, this is a euphemism. It's just like when Abraham goes into his tent to know his wife, it's a euphemism, you know? So if it is a euphemism, then what he's asking him to swear by isn't exactly Abraham's thigh. And it's more like covenant. When the covenant that Abraham made with God, and they divided the animals in half, and God walked between them. The statement is, if I break my covenant, may I be made like these animals. And so here, in making this covenant, in taking this oath, the servant is saying, if I break my oath, may I lose what I have sworn by.
Makes more sense.
It does make more sense. And we're not going to get into what they're swearing by because this is going online. But that's the kind of oath this is. It's very serious. So I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of the earth, that you shall not take a wife for my son of the daughters of the Canaanites amongst whom I live. Now, why is that a problem? Why is Abraham in the land? What did God say about the Canaanites? That he wanted Abraham to go in and take the land because the Canaanites were wicked in the Lord's sight.
Oh, okay.
And we had seen the same language used about the world pre-flood. So that tells us that the Canaanites are really wicked people. At least that's the narrative we're being told. That's the story. And so Abraham doesn't want his son to marry a Canaanite because of how wicked they are. He doesn't want his son to have that bad influence in his life. So he goes on in verse 4, but you shall go to my country and to my relatives, and take a wife for my son Isaac. So this is weird. There's a lot of weirdness in this, but this is also weird. He says not just to go back to his country, because here's the thing, Abraham was called out of his country. And so why go back there? Well, he's probably looking for someone with similar values. He's probably not looking, he's probably looking for someone who worships the same God, someone who has the same values that he has, that he raised his son with. And even in his country, there's no one who worships God Most High. There's no one who worships the same God as Abraham. Abraham's call is pretty unique. So if nothing else, he's looking for someone who shares the values, who has a similar upbringing. And so he tells him, go to my relatives. Yeah, it's weird, but Abraham's also in a really weird situation. He's trying to find someone who won't lead his son astray. Being a foreigner in a foreign land, worshiping gods that are not worshiped there, having values that are not embraced there. And so he's trying to find someone as close to his values, his God, as he possibly can. And this is just me trying to explain the weirdness of this passage, of what Abraham is actually asking, trying to make some sense of it. But I don't know if you have any insight either.
It kind of is sort of like almost parallel to other cultures in a sense, because take, for example, the Chinese especially, wanted their sons to marry daughters either from the same village or somebody they approved of, because really in Korean culture especially, when two people get together and they fall in love and they're not of the same status, the parents look down upon them because they want all their sons and daughters who are kind of like professional people. They don't want them to marry down.
Yeah.
They want them to find a mate that is equal to their level of life.
Yeah.
And so that's just an example. But that is a real true thing about the Korean upper class.
I think even here we look for someone with a similar upbringing.
Right.
Right. We look for someone who shares values or who shares interests.
Right.
And today that's especially difficult because we have a culture that is very very fractured. People have very individualized interests, and I think that kind of resonates with where they're at, because Abraham has very individualized interests, and the way he's raised his son is going to be so different from everyone around him. But I think when we look at Abraham's status is going to set him apart as well. We see him taking on in previous chapters several kings, the armies of several kings, and defeating them. And so Abraham is a very rich man. And finding someone of similar status, that's also going to be a problem, even within his family, because they all stayed behind in Ur. And so I don't think his family is going to be of the same status as Abraham either. But we'll see. All right, verse 5, the servant said to him, "What if the woman isn't willing to follow me to this land? Must I bring your son again to the land you came from?" So I love that he starts there. The servant starts there. What if she's not willing to go? Because we have this expectation of the ancient past that it's very patriarchal. and that the interests of women are not really respected or valued. And so here, that's the question the servant asks him. That's the first question. What if she's not willing to go?
What happens?
Abraham said to him, "Beware that you don't bring my son there again. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my birth, who spoke to me and who swore to me, saying, I will give this land to your offspring. He will send his angel before you, and you shall take a wife for my son from there. If the woman isn't willing to follow you, then you shall be clear from this oath to me. Only you shall not bring my son there again." So he's also concerned about the people there. He doesn't want his son going to that land because he might fall into that land's ways. The servant put his hand under the thigh of Abraham his master and swore to him concerning this matter. The servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, having a variety of good things of his master's with him. He arose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. Now remember, Nahor is Abraham's brother. So this is the city in which Nahor lives. He made the camels kneel down outside the city by the well of water at the time of evening, the time that women go out to draw water. Do you know that in Afghanistan, the U.S. tried to put in indoor plumbing, and they couldn't do it. The U.S. Army tried to install indoor plumbing in all these different villages in which they went in, and someone kept bombing all the pumping stations. And it turns out it was the women of the villages, because the only time they had to get away from their husbands and be with other women was when they went out to the wells to get water. And they didn't want to be isolated. So they kept sabotaging their attempts to bring them.
I read about somebody, but I didn't realize it was the women.
And I think you have to think of these things and how the culture works,
Right.
you know. And so he's going to the well at the time that the women go to draw water. He is very much invading their time. And he said, "Lord, the God of my master Abraham, please give me success today and show kindness to my master Abraham. Behold, I am standing by the spring of water. The daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Let it happen that the young lady to whom I will say, 'Please let down your pitcher that I may drink,' then she says, 'Drink, and I will also give your camels a drink.' Let her be the one you have appointed for your servant Isaac. By this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master." I like that it says that he said this. So he's probably praying aloud. And before he had finished speaking, behold, Rebekah came out, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother. So Nahor is Abraham's brother, Milcah is Nahor's wife, Bethuel is their son, Abraham's nephew. And so this is Abraham's grandniece, the same generation as Isaac. So we could assume, even though it hasn't been said, that they're of similar age. Okay, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, with her pitcher on her shoulder. The young lady was very beautiful to look at, a virgin. No man had known her. She went down to the spring, filled her pitcher, and came up. The servant ran to meet her and said, "Please give me a drink, a little water from your pitcher." So if he had to run to meet her, even though he's praying aloud, she probably didn't hear him, unless he's praying very loudly. She said, "Drink, my lord." She hurried and let down her pitcher on her hand and gave him a drink. So she's letting it down from her shoulder into her hand and pouring it. When she had finished giving him a drink, she said, "I will also draw for your camels until they have finished drinking." She hurried and emptied her pitcher into the trough and ran again to the well to draw and drew for all his camels. The man looked steadfastly at her, remaining silent, to know whether the Lord had made his journey prosperous or not. As the camels had done drinking, the man took a golden ring of half a shekel weight and 2 bracelets for her hands of 10 shekels weight of gold, and said, "Whose daughter are you? Please tell me. Is there room in your father's house for us to stay?" She said to him, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor." She said moreover to him, "We have both straw and feed enough and room to lodge in." The man bowed his head and worshipped the Lord. He said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his loving kindness and his truth towards my master. As for me, the Lord has led me on the way to the house of my master's relatives." The young lady ran and told her mother's house about these words. Rebekah had a brother, and his name was Laban. Laban ran out to the man to the spring. When he saw the ring and the bracelets on his sister's hands, and when he heard the words of Rebekah, his sister, saying, "This is what the man said to me," he came to the man. Behold, he was standing by the camels at the spring. He said, "Come in, you blessed of the Lord. Why do you stand outside? For I have prepared the house and room for the camels." I kind of wonder, is he responding to the gold bracelet and necklace?
Of course.
Don't you know it's all ready for you? How generous. But I want to notice that he's responding to Rebekah having accepted these gifts already. So Rebekah from the start is the one with agency here. And as we go on, we might question that a bit, but we'll come back to it, because I think the question of her agency is very important to this story, especially in the time we're living in, because it's not always been a question that we asked of the Bible. So in 32, the man came into the house and he unloaded the camels. He gave straw and feed for the camels and water to wash his feet and the feet of the men who were with him. Food was set before him to eat, but he said, "I will not eat until I have told my message." Laban said, "Speak on." He said, "I am Abraham's servant. The Lord has blessed my master greatly. He has become great. The Lord has given him flocks and herds, silver and gold, male servants and female servants, and camels and donkeys. Sarah, my master's wife, bore a son to my master when she was old. She has given all that he has to him. He has given all that he has to him. So Abraham has given all of it to his son Isaac. My master made me swear, saying, 'You shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanite, in whose land I live, but you shall go to my father's house and to my relatives and take a wife for my son.' I asked my master, 'What if the woman will not follow me?' He said to me, 'The Lord, before whom I walk, will send his angel with you and prosper your way. You shall take a wife for my son from my relatives and of my father's house. Then you will be clear from my oath. When you come to my relatives, if they don't give her to you, you shall be clear from my oath.' I came today to the spring and said, 'The Lord, the God of my master Abraham, if now you do prosper my way which I go, behold, I am standing by this spring of water. Let it happen that the maiden who comes out to draw, to whom I say, "Please give me a little water from your pitcher to drink," then she tells me, "Drink, and I will also draw for your camels." Let her be the woman whom the Lord has appointed for my master's son." Before I had finished speaking in my heart, behold, Rebekah came out with her pitcher on her shoulder. She went down to the spring and drew. I said to her, "Please let me drink." She hurried and let down her pitcher from her shoulder and said, "Drink, and I will also give your camels a drink." So I drank, and she also gave the camels a drink. I asked her, and she said, I asked her and said, "Whose daughter are you?" She said, "The daughter of Bethuel, Nahor's son, whom Milcah bore to him." I put the ring on her nose and the bracelets on her hands. I bowed my head and worshiped the Lord and blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had led me in the right way to take my master's brother's daughter for his son. Now, if you will deal kindly and truly with my master, tell me. If not, tell me, that I may turn to the right hand or to the left. That's quite a wordy retelling. And notice the retelling is not quite the same as the original. There's a slightly different wording. There are slightly different details. And this is not at all uncommon in the Torah. We'll see it over and over again. But the details differ. And it is almost as if the Torah is saying, and one famous quote is that the Torah does not waste words, is a famous saying, but it repeats itself over and over again. If it does not waste words, then there is a lesson in the repetition. And I think one important lesson is that a variation in the story does not invalidate the truth of the story. And that was a hard lesson for me to learn as I studied scripture, that things can be told in slightly different ways and still be true. So we're waiting on the answer. Then Laban and Bethuel answered, "The thing proceeds from the Lord. We can't speak to you bad or good. Behold, Rebekah is before you. Take her and go, and let her be your master's son's wife, as the Lord has spoken." In other words, they're saying, who are we to argue with God?
Yeah.
You have the word of God, you have signs. Are we going to argue with God here? And this would seem that they are invalidating Rebekah's agency, but let's continue just a moment before we judge them too harshly. In verse 52, when Abraham's servant heard their words, he bowed himself down to the earth to the Lord. The servant brought out jewels of silver and jewels of gold and clothing and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave precious things to her brother and her mother. They ate and drank. he and the men who were with him, and stayed all night. They rose up in the morning, and he said, "Send me away to my master." Her brother and her mother said, "Let the young lady stay with us a few days, at least 10. After that, she will go." He said to them, "Don't hinder me, since the Lord has prospered my way. Send me away that I may go to my master." They said, "We will call the young lady and ask her." They called Rebekah and said to her, "Will you go with this man?" She said, "I will go." So here we have her answer.
Yeah.
In other words, what if she said no? Well, then the servant would still be released from his oath. We're reminded that this is all part of the oath, and this is part of God's will. She said, "I will go." They sent away Rebekah, their sister, with her nurse, Abraham's servant, and his men. They blessed Rebekah and said to her, "Our sister, may you be the mother of thousands of 10,000s, and let your offspring possess the gate of those who hate them." Possess the gate of those who hate them. That's an interesting phrase, isn't it? Does your Bible have anything different?
Um,
It doesn't say.
yeah.
Okay.
May your sister become thousands. No, well, we read that part. And
Mm,
may your offspring gain possession of the gates of their foes.
okay. So that's basically saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Rebekah arose with her ladies. They rode on the camels and followed the man. The servant took Rebekah and went his way. Isaac came from the way of Beer Lahai Roi, for he lived in the land of the south. So that would be the Negev, the desert to the south. Isaac went out to meditate in the field at the evening. He lifted up his eyes and looked. Behold, there were camels coming. Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she got off the camel. This is almost like their eyes met across a crowded room, you know?
Right.
He lifted up.
So happened. Yeah.
He looked up and she looked up, and they saw each other from far off.
It's called Kismet.
Yes.
Don't you know?
All right. So, and when she saw Isaac, she got off the camel. She said to the servant, "Who is the man who is walking in the field to meet us?" The servant said, "It is my master." She took her veil and covered herself. The servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent. Now remember, Sarah has already died.
Right.
And took Rebekah, and she became his wife. He loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Now, here's another little bit of weirdness, is that he's going into his mother's tent with his new wife. Well, sure, his mother has died. The tent is unoccupied. But I'm reminded of when I was looking up how to make rope beds, because I really wanted to learn how to do that. And it turns out it's a very involved process. It takes two people at least 12 hours to make a rope bed about the size of a twin size bed. And there was a seller in Pakistan who is being asked by foreigners about the beds he makes. And one of the questions they asked is about how much does it cost to make one of these beds? And he said, locally, about $17. And if we sold it overseas, it would probably be $1,000 bed. because of all the import taxes and extra things that you have to do to sell a bed in the United States. But one of the questions that he was asked is, how comfy is it? And he replied like this. He said, now, if a man is really tired, he can fall asleep anywhere, even on the ground. So if we're talking about a bed, we're not really talking about sleep, are we? If we're talking about a bed, then the man is receiving it as a wedding gift. And in fact, in parts of Pakistan, in parts of India, it is still traditional to give a bed as a wedding gift. A single man in those parts doesn't have a bed. He sleeps on the ground because the bed is a wedding gift. So when Rebecca arrives and Isaac is there, he's a single man. What's in his tent? Nothing. He sleeps on the ground. Now that he has a wife, no one has made him a bed. So he goes into the only tent with an empty bed in the whole camp.
He's smart.
Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things, if you don't study ancient cultures, if you don't study foreign cultures, you probably wouldn't get that.
Or even read some books.
Right.
I mean, come on, there are books and books and tons of books that speak to that,
Mm-hmm.
The stories.
And, one of my questions when I was reading this is, where do people sleep in ancient times? We sleep on inner spring mattresses. We sleep on foam mattresses. Well, those are all very modern technologies. What did people sleep on 200 years ago before inner springs? And it turns out they slept on rope. And when I started looking into that, well, there's really only one place in the world that still makes beds like that, and that's India. And there might be other pockets of the world that do, but I wasn't able to find them in my research. I found some in England that looked very primitive. Like you would sleep on them and you would definitely not have a good time sleeping on one of those. Because they're these big grids of just rope. And you talk about waking up in the morning with knots. That'll do it. So that's my little insight for this story. I don't know if you have any questions about this other than that.
Well, only that for me, the other culture that has something close to makeshifts would be the Japanese, because the Japanese worked and lived and slept on tatami mats, and the tatami mats were made out of thatching grass and whatnot.
Yeah.
And that has kind of followed, although in more recent times, those tatami mats have become more sophisticated and more expensive, depending on the type of home you have.
Yeah.
But that's how they did it.
Yeah, I knew someone who slept on one of those.
Yeah.
And I was absolutely amazed because it's that thick. It's an inch thick.
I can imagine.
And I can't even imagine sleeping like that. But then I sleep on my side. So I would just wake up with bruises all over, I'm sure. All right. So chapter 25. Abraham took another wife. Remember, his wife had died. And her name was Keturah. She bore him, there we go. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian. Midian, by the way, is north of Egypt and south of Israel. Ishbak and Shua. Jokshan, Jokshan became the father of Sheba and Dedan. The sons of Dedan were Asherim, Letushim, and Lumim. The sons of Midian were Ephah, Epher, Hanok, Ebedah, and Eldah. All these were the children of Keturah. Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac. So he had sons by another wife. He gave them nothing. It says he gave all that he had to his son Isaac. But Abraham gave gifts to the sons of Abraham's concubines. So Isaac definitely got the lion's share of the inheritance, but he also made sure that none of his sons went away with nothing. While he still lived, he sent them away from Isaac, his son, eastward to the east country. These are the days of the years of Abraham's life which he lived, 175 years.
And he still fathered children? Holy moly.
I guess he was a bit spry in his old age. All right, Abraham gave up his spirit and died at a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, which is near Mamre, the field which Abraham purchased from the children of Heth. Abraham was buried there with Sarah his wife. After the death of Abraham, God blessed Isaac his son. Isaac lived by Bir Lahai Roi, which, if you remember, was in the Negev. Now, we're not told where Abraham's other wife was buried. I think that's odd.
You mean his second wife? His second wife?
Technically his third wife, and at least his third wife, because it says plural, his concubines.
Yeah.
Now, in one of the translations I was reading earlier, it points out that there are 12 tribes, 12 clans of, no, I think that's coming up. Yes, that's coming up. Never mind. Verse 12. Now, this is the history of the generations of Ishmael. Now that we're told and we can rest assured that Isaac has been blessed, let's talk about Ishmael. Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's servant, bore to Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael by their names according to the order of their birth. The firstborn of Ishmael, Nebaioth, then Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Timah, Jeter, Naphish, and Kedemah. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their villages and by their encampments, 12 princes according to their nations. So notice that Ishmael has had 12 sons, and they are the princes of 12 nations. This is very similar to the 12 tribes of Israel, and it's giving us a certain parallelism that even though Ishmael is not blessed in the same way Isaac is blessed, God has not abandoned Ishmael, nor has he been blessed any less than Isaac. So this is one of those subtle ways that the Bible assures us of that God does not forget Ishmael. These are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. He gave up his spirit and died and was gathered to his people. They lived from Havilah to Shur, that is before Egypt, as you go towards Assyria. He lived opposite all his relatives. This is the history of the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham became the father of Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban the Syrian, to be his wife. Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren. So we had the same problem with Sarah, that she couldn't conceive children, right? And it was the intercession of the Lord that caused her to be able to conceive. Now we see the second generation in which it is the intercession of the Lord. And we'll see this one more time with Jacob. So Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren. The Lord was entreated by him, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. The children struggled together within her. She said, "If it is like this, why do I live?" She went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb. Two peoples will be separated from your body. The one people will be stronger than the other, and the elder will serve the younger." Now, that's the usual way in which that last line is translated. The elder will serve the younger, but it can also say the greater will serve the lesser. And that makes it a little less clear what exactly is being said. It means we can give them the benefit of the doubt that they don't know what this prophecy means, that there's a little bit of mystery to it.
Intrigue.
Yes, just a bit. But notice too that the prophecy is given to Rebekah, not to Isaac. So this is a little bit odd. I mean, the Lord spoke to Sarah as well. We see that Abraham is a prophet, but so is Sarah. Here we see that Isaac is a prophet, but so is Rebekah. The Lord has given her a prophecy. And we'll see later what Isaac does with it. When her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red all over like a hairy garment. Have you ever seen a Middle Eastern man covered in red hair?
No.
Neither have I. All right, let's keep going. They named him Esau. After that, his brother came out, and his hand had hold of Esau's heel. He was named Jacob, which means the grasper. He is the one who is opportunistic, in other words. That's what his name means. He's crafty, he's sneaky, he's a grasper. But Esau is shown as being hairy. And it's almost like Esau is being portrayed in this ultra masculine way, whereas Jacob is sneaky and a grasper. So they have these very opposite personalities, right? Mm-hmm. He was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. So Isaac and Rebekah married when Isaac was 40. At 60, they were born. So it wasn't for 20 years. 20 years they didn't have children. All right. So I'm going to point out now, why is Esau covered in red hair? Esau is the father of the nation of Edom. We'll see in just a little bit that is his nickname, Edom. And Edom is the location of a set of ancient copper mines. And the reason Esau is covered in red hair is because he is the father of Edom, the place where all the copper comes from. At this point where we're reading, this is all written down from oral history. And so the history of all these nations is being greatly compressed. And it's being told in almost a mythical, in a folkloric or metaphorical way. So we're to remember Esau as the father of this nation. He's covered in red hair so that we can't forget. We have to put these two things together. And it tells us that even though some of these things appear very literal, there's still a very metaphorical way in which they're put together. So we can't take this as totally literal. Otherwise, we have to believe in people in the Middle East born with red hair.
If you don't really know the Bible, we would not know that.
No, and if you don't know the geography and the
That's right.
history, and so you have to have a broad
Right.
set of knowledge to really
Exactly.
catch these things. All right, the boys grew. Esau was a skilled hunter, a man of the field. Jacob was a quiet man living in tents. So here they're contrasted again. So Jacob is a quiet man living in tents. What's Esau then? He's a loud man living outdoors. So if we think of Jacob as being quiet and reserved, Esau is loud and boisterous. We can put together what their personalities are like from the comparisons. Now Isaac loved Esau because he ate his venison. Rebekah loved Jacob. Jacob boiled stew. Esau came in from the field, and he was famished. Esau said to him, "Please feed me with some of that red stew." Right? For I am famished. Therefore, his name was called Edom. Jacob said, "First, sell me your birthright." So here we're given a little more of Esau's personality. He doesn't think ahead. He doesn't think, I'm going to be out for a long time. Maybe I should bring a snack or two. He just stays out. And he comes back in a desperate state. And even if he came back with something he killed, it's not going to be ready for a while. And maybe he didn't come back that day with something he killed. Maybe he doesn't plan for tomorrow. But Jacob is there cooking. So we see him planning, being ready. After all, he is clever. Jacob said, "First, sell me your birthright." Esau said, "Behold, I am about to die. What good is the birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me first." He swore to him. He sold him his birthright to Jacob. Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew. Have you ever had lentil stew?
I had lentil soup.
Yeah,
I make lentil soup.
right.
Uh-huh.
You know, bread and lentil stew, there's not even any meat in that.
Unless you put some.
Right. I mean, it's good, but
I have to put ham in mine.
Yeah.
I mean, Esau is selling his birthright for a vegetarian meal. That's desperation.
Yeah.
All right. He ate and drank, rose up and went his way. So Esau despised his birthright. Now, it's an interesting word here, despised. And literally translated, it means loved it less. We'll see the same word used to describe the children as well. In this case, they're grown men, but we're still going to say the children of Isaac and Rebekah, because it tells us they were each loved by one of the parents, but they were despised by the other. Well, it doesn't mean despised. It means they were loved less than the other child. You know? And, don't answer this, but think, did you ever wonder of your own parents, do they love this sibling more than me? And
Yeah.
how does that feel?
Yeah.
My brother and I had discussions on this back and forth when we were kids, whether or not Dad loved him or me more.
Mm.
And I have to tell you, sometimes I honestly felt that my dad loved my brother more. And that was a pretty terrible feeling. Not because I wasn't happy for my brother, but because I wish I had more connection to my father. And so I wonder if that really is where Jacob is coming from. Is that why he's a grasper? In a way, that is the dynamic of the older brother and the younger brother vying for their father's attention. And one is the one that is loved more, and the other is the grasper. So there's so much that's being really just, there are so many layers to this story of the two brothers vying for their father's attention, and really the two brothers vying for their mother's attention too, because we see that Rebekah loves Jacob more. And I wonder about Esau's connection to Rebekah. Does he compete for that? How does he feel about Jacob's connection to Rebekah? Does he feel the same way, that same jealousy,
I'm sure.
Well, before we move on to chapter 26, do you have any questions or insights?
Well, my insight is such that we grew up like that.
Mm-hmm.
My father started a second family, and his second family was more important than my brother and I.
Mm.
So we grew up actually being raised by grandparents and aunts,
Hmm.
because we knew we could not be a total family.
Yeah.
Eventually, I was the first one to go to the second house because I was the eldest and had to take care of the younger ones of the second family.
Mm.
So yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah.
heartache.
And
Heartache that we both suffered.
Yeah.
Brother and I.
and you know what? That dynamic, it sounds like the next generation
Oh,
as well.
yeah.
So we'll see that in the very next generation. All right. So chapter 26, there was a famine in the land, in addition to the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. So here we're comparing now Isaac to Abraham. We've compared the brothers, right?
Mhm.
So now we're going to compare Isaac to Abraham. And the text is pretty clear about what we're doing here. There's another famine just like the days of Abraham. Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, to Gerar. Now Abraham had gone to Egypt in the days of that famine. But Isaac goes to the king of the Philistines, to Gerar. Now Abimelech, this is the same name of the king that was king in the days of Abraham, when Abraham was in Gerar. So there's a question as to whether this is the same Abimelech or a different Abimelech. And it would be perfectly natural for this to be a different Abimelech, because the name, breaking it up, Abimelech means son of the king. So this might have been, like naming the king junior every generation. Like Charles the Third,
Yeah, right.
or Elizabeth II. This very well may have just been the next generation of the Abimelechs in Gerar. So in verse 2, the Lord appeared to him, that would be Isaac, and said, "Don't go down into Egypt. Live in the land I will tell you about. Live in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For I will give to you and to your offspring all these lands, and I will establish the oath which I swore to Abraham your father." So here's Isaac's test of faith. Remember, Abraham had a test of faith. This one is Isaac's. Egypt is the natural choice. It's farther south. The lands are prosperous. The Nile floods every year. The agriculture is predictable and easy. Egypt is just the easy, natural choice. Philistia is on the coast, and coastlines aren't the most prosperous. Sure, they're wonderful to live on because the weather is wonderful, but they're not the most prosperous agriculturally. That's just farther inland. It says, "Go to the land I will tell you about. Live in this land, for I will be with you, and I will bless you, for I will give to you and to your offspring all these lands, and I will establish the oath which I swore to your father Abraham." Verse 4, "I will multiply your offspring as the stars of the sky, and will give all these lands to your offspring. In your offspring, all the nations of the earth will be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my requirements, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws." Isaac lived in Gerar. The men of the place asked him about his wife. Where have we heard that before?
Yeah, we've heard that. That's for sure.
Wasn't Abraham asked the same thing?
Right.
He said,
Sarah.
"She is my sister."
Mhm.
Just like Abraham, he's following the playbook. For he was afraid to say, "My wife," lest he thought the men of the place might kill me for Rebekah, because she is beautiful to behold. When he had been there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out at a window and saw, and behold, Isaac was caressing Rebekah, his wife. Abimelech called Isaac and said, "Behold, surely she is your wife. Why did you say she is my sister?" Isaac said to him, "Because I said, lest I die because of her." Abimelech said, "What is this you have done to us? One of the people might easily have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt on us." Abimelech commanded all the people, saying, "He who touches this man or his wife will surely be put to death." Isaac sowed in that land. So we studied Sodom and Gomorrah before. And here the king says, anyone who touches this man or his wife, they're not talking about in the same way. And just like in Sodom and Gomorrah, they're probably not talking about in the same way. In the case of the men, they're talking about murder. In the case of the wife, they're talking something entirely different. And so we have another passage in which these should be looked at differently, even though the wording is, well, exactly the same. But he gives the same assurance. Touch either one, and you will surely be put to death. Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100 times what he planted. The Lord blessed him. The man grew great and grew more and more until he became very great. He had possessions of flocks, possessions of herds, and a great household. The Philistines envied him. Now all the wells which his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father, the Philistines had stopped and filled with earth. Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you are much mightier than we." Isaac departed from there, encamped in the valley of Gerar, and lived there. Now, this isn't exactly a great way to part ways, right?
Mhm.
He stops up the wells and then says, "Get out." And the wells are their source of water. They don't have a whole lot of choice in the matter. It's either they leave or they fight, because without water,
Yeah.
they're not staying peaceably. So Isaac departed from there, encamped in the valley of Gerar, and lived there. Isaac dug again the wells of water, which they had dug in the days of Abraham his father, for the Philistines had stopped them after the death of Abraham. He called their names after the names by which his father had called them. Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of flowing water. The herdsmen of Gerar argued with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, the water is ours." So he called the name of the well Esek, because they contended with him. They dug another well, and they argued over that also. So he called its name Sitnah. He left that place and dug another well. They didn't argue over that one, so he called it Rehoboth. He said, "For now the Lord has made room for us, and we will be fruitful in the land." He went up from there to Beersheba. The Lord appeared to him the same night and said, "I am the God of Abraham, your father. Don't be afraid, for I am with you, and will bless you and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake." He built an altar there and called on the Lord's name and pitched his tent there. There Isaac's servants dug a well. Then Abimelech went to him from Gerar with Ahuzath, his friend, and Phicol, the captain of his army. Isaac said to him, "Why have you come to me, since you hate me and have sent me away from you?" They said, "We saw plainly that the Lord was with you." We said, "Let there now be an oath between us, even between us and you, and let's make a covenant with you, that you will do us no harm, as we have not touched you, and as we have done to you nothing but good, and have sent you away in peace. You are now the blessed of the Lord." So, did they really do that?
Doubtful. Doubtful.
It's a stretch to say that the people of Gerar sent Isaac away in peace. They stopped the wells and said, "You are much greater than us and will overtake us.
Leave.
So get out." To say that they have done nothing but good to Isaac is just downright false.
Right.
To say that they sent him away in peace, well, they kind of backed him against a wall, and Isaac left them in peace. So it's a stretch at best. But now that they're in a vulnerable position, they would like to be seen in a more favorable light. He made them a feast, and they ate and drank. They rose up sometime in the morning and swore an oath to one another. Isaac sent them away, and they departed from him in peace. So Isaac shows that he is not only more willing to commit to peace, but that he is far more generous than they have ever been with him. In this way, Isaac shows his virtue. The same day, Isaac, oh dear. The same day, Isaac's servants came and told him concerning the well which they had dug, and said to him, "We have found water." He called it Sheba. Therefore, the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. When Esau was 40 years old, he took his wife Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. They grieved Isaac's and Rebekah's spirits. In the last translation that I read this in, it said that they made them very anxious. So does your Bible have anything?
This says, and they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah.
They made life bitter. I like that. How about yours?
They were a source of grief.
A source of grief. Okay. So when Esau was 40 years old, so here Isaac has taken one wife. And Abraham took one wife, but that plan kind of fell apart later in life. Isaac takes one wife. Esau, we see, takes two wives at the same time. Now, where have we seen that before in Genesis?
Two wives?
Esau took two wives.
Esau takes two wives at the same time.
Where does it say that?
So it says in verse 34, when Esau was 40 years old, he took as his wife Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. He takes two wives. So reading in Genesis before, we see this as the first time we see this is with Lamech, one of the sons of Cain. Right? The first time we see someone take two wives, it is Lamech, which is Melech spelled backwards. In other words, king spelled backwards. When we see two wives, we see someone who thinks themselves a king. They are acting like a king, and in a way that is somewhat troubling, because while Isaac and Rebekah see each other as partners, Esau sees his two wives as companions at best. Lamech took his two wives because they were beautiful. But the standard is Adam and Eve, that Eve is an Ezer Kenegdo, that she is a helper, a companion, a perfect mate, a partner. So the ideal of marriage is partnership, right? Is equal partners. That's what we see in Genesis. That's what we see of Adam and Eve. And when we see monogamous relationships, when we see like Abraham and Sarah, and they argue with one another, and they give up ground to one another, they compromise. And sure, they compromised in a way that made Abraham take another wife. But that's the model, is equal partners. But when we see a man take two wives, they're not equal partners. Because a king is always alone, right? His wife will never take the throne.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way royalty works. The king takes the throne, his sons take the throne when he dies. His wife will never be an equal companion. She will never take the throne. So a king never has equal partners. And when we see this in Genesis, we see it in the theme of a man taking two wives. Genesis is somewhat problematic to interpret. There is no prohibition in the entire Bible against polygamy. And today it would be polyamory. There's no verse in Scripture that forbids this. But we have several places in which, like this, it's spoken poorly of. And we have several places in which it's limited. Like in 1 King, it tells us a king should not, in 1 Kings, it tells us that a king should not have too many wives. In other words, he should never have so many wives that he can't support them. He should never have so many wives that he can't fulfill his duties as a king. So we have a lot of information in the Bible about polygamy, about polyamory, but it's never spoken favorably of. In this way, it tells us that Isaac is virtuous in a way that Esau is not. Which is good, because we're not going to see a whole lot of good things about Isaac for a while. He is a grasper after all. So I think we're going to call it here in chapter 26, and we'll pick up chapter 27 next week. So before we conclude, do you have any comments or questions? And I should note online, if there's anyone watching, type in if you have any comments or questions as well.
It's a lot to absorb again, as I usually say, when it's like this. But it also gives you a different take on it, because it's, again, something new. Because in my estimation, I always used to hear about Isaac when I was a little younger. And I preferred him, and I thought he was a hero a lot of times. And now you see the adult part of him, which shows a different persona.
Right.
Really. But that's why we're adults, so we can ferret things out. We can discern for ourselves,
Yeah.
two sides.
Yeah, and I love that the Bible does not shy away from showing us the very human side of the patriarchs, of these people that are very much larger than life, and they are almost, they are definitely intended to be hero figures, but it doesn't shy away from showing us how human they are, how human their failings are.
But you also see a side where God's hand is in it at all times.
Yes.
And how he manages them, the families that, and it's all about covenant in a sense where they follow God's words. Most of them do.
Yeah.
And their lives are surrounded by the covenants they made with the Lord, which brings them, back again, not only the human side of that, but actually what has been preordained for them. Lives.
Yeah.
That's how it's interesting.
And I love that the Bible gives us like completely different, almost conflicting sets of moral values. Here we have we have monogamy versus polygamy. And today that is definitely something that is a conflicting set of moral values. I would love if our church attracted people who were looking to be in polyamorous relationships, because the Bible has so much to say about that. And it is a guide to how to navigate those very complex relationships. And maybe even when you should avoid relationships that are that complicated.
Mhm.
But right now, we have a lot of people that are talking about how to go about having relationships like that. And they're not necessarily turning to the Bible as a guide because they've been taught, well, the Bible only teaches monogamy.
Mhm.
Well, it doesn't. That is something it teaches,
Yeah.
but it's not the only thing it teaches.
And the exception to that rule
Mm-hmm.
is the Mormons.
Mm.
You know, when
Well-
you think about who started that, Joseph Smith, right?
Yeah.
A human being, not
Mhm.
God. But
And if
somehow,
we were to go into that, we would have to talk about how
yeah,
thoroughly they abused that.
right, of course,
And that's why we don't have it in this country anymore.
yeah,
Not because it's not moral if you lived by biblical standards, but because people didn't live by biblical standards and
Mhm.
were not moral.
Mhm.
And we had to put a stop to that.
yeah. But it's kind of like out there, and we know I know a little bit about it, so
Mm-hmm.
I know it was that in Utah,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
The
primarily.
Mormons.
you
Yeah.
know. So, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's reality.
Oh, yes.
It was reality.
And you know what? In the 1800s, the Mormons were not the only group of Christians or Christian-like groups that attempted
Sure.
to be polygamous. They were not the only polygamous groups, nor there were groups that lived in communes.
Mhm.
They lived with communal property,
Mhm.
and they lived in polygamous groups. And they considered that that was biblical, and the law of the land did not prohibit it, so that's what they did.
Yeah.
And so the laws of the land decided, one, you could no longer be polygamous, and two, you could no longer have communal property like that. So, and one of the communities was is now known for their cutlery, the Oneida group.
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay.
That was what their commune made, was
With
silverware.
pepper, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They had to have some kind to support that.
Mhm.
I mean, support the group, and that was one of the things.
Yeah. And they were taking a very literal interpretation of the Bible and living the way they thought it said they should.
Yeah.
So that's,
Very interesting today.
oh yes.
Sure, that makes you think back. You know.
Oh goodness, yes. And it's only going to get more complicated from here. So,
Here on all.
right.
Here.
All right, so that's where we'll call it. I've got no questions on the live stream, so I'm going to end that there. So, catch you next time in chapter 27.